Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading with Tatiana. Today I'm reviewing First Person Singular by Haruki Murakami, and unfortunately I love all his previous works, but I gave this book a 2 out of 5. Today my Booktuber Shoutout is Read a Day Club. She is a huge Murakami fan and she has lots of reviews on a lot of his works, so I just want to give a shout out to her channel. And as always, before I go into my full book review, I will always appreciate it if you can hit the subscribe button. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you've read this book or any of Murakami's work, I would love to hear your comments down below. This book, First Person Singular, was published in 2020, and the genre is short stories, and it is fiction, but also maybe non-fiction. It's not really clear when you read the book, and I'll get into more of the reasons why. Murakami was born 1949 in Japan, and he's a very prolific writer from Japan. A lot of his works have been translated to over 50 languages, and I remember when I was in my early 20s, one of my first books I read after school, like after university for fun, was 1Q84. It is a thick book, but because of the way he writes, it's so awesome to get lost in his writing. Like, I remember when I read that book, it was one of the first books where I felt like every word was intentionally placed where they should have been to propel the plot, which is interesting that I had that realization or that observation because all his works are translated, but I really felt that, and I really want to reread 1Q84 again because I just felt like I was swept away in this world and it was amazing. Back to the author. So his work is so prolific because he spans several genres. So he does a lot of mix and blend of science fiction and fantasy and crime fiction. It's all kind of blend into our real world as well. And he also is known to use a lot of magic realism in his works, which I really enjoy. But I think a lot of people are divided with his works. I found that in my life that people either love his work or it's not for him. In addition to covering lots of genres, he also covers lots of writing styles. So he does a lot of like really big novels, regular size novels. He also does novellas. He also does short stories. He also does collection of essays. He even had a book called What I Think About When I'm Running, which is literally like his train of thought while he was running and training for marathons, which I thought was really cool. And to add to that, one thing that I really admire about him is because I didn't start running until my mid-20s, that Murakami actually didn't start running until he was 33, and now he's a pretty competitive and endurance runner. I don't know if he is still now because he's in his 70s, but when he started when he was 33, he picked up quite a bit, so much that he wrote a book called What I Think About When I'm Running, which I thought was really cool. I mentioned earlier that people are kind of divided on his works because they either love his writing style or they hate it. The reason why people find his work polarizing, especially in Japan, is that find his writing to be very un-Japanese. I don't know enough about Japanese culture to comment on it, but I thought that was interesting because I can't really imagine there being a Canadian writer writing and I'd be like, oh, that's very un-Canadian. However, having said that, Japan is more of a homogenous country than Canada, so that's probably why, so I thought that was interesting. Another thing I found interesting was in an interview with The Guardian, Murakami said that his belief is that his surrealism and magic realism he brings in his books are important, especially for people who are in turmoil or having a hard time in their life. He noticed that his books were really popular in the 1990s during the fall of the Soviet Union. He also noticed that his books were really popular when the whole Berlin Wall fell as well. So he notices and is aware of the patterns that maybe because his book is like rooted in reality, but because it's also like suspended in the surrealism world, that people are able to use it as a form of escapism, which I think is like super neat of his works, and that's something that he should be really proud of. As I mentioned earlier, this book is a collection of short stories, so instead of my usual about the characters and setting of the story, I'll just kind of do a quick synopsis of the 8 short stories without spoiling too much. I do want to say that all of them, I believe, are set in Japan, and also all of them have a hint of surrealism or magic realism, which I really enjoyed when I was reading it. But when I finished each one, I felt like, what did I learn from that? Or what did I gain from reading that? So I'll talk about that more in my why I didn't like section. The first short story is called Cream, and basically it is a man recalling a time in his youth when he was a student where he was invited to a piano recital by a girl, and he was kind of surprised that this girl invited him. And he went to the piano recital, which is kind of like out of the way, not in the city, and when he got there didn't seem to be an actual piano recital. The second short story is called On the Stone Pillow, and basically it is a man who works part-time. I think it's like a convenience store or a bar, and him and his coworkers have a night out, and one of his coworkers, who's actually quitting soon, they go for a nightcap, and that evening they have intimacy, and she's like, oh, can I say someone else's name during sex, which is weird and strange, and they obviously had no connection with each other really, but maybe more for companionship for the night. And then the story ends with she later sends him her collection of poems that she's written. The third short story is Charlie Parker Plays Bossa Nova. So this one was probably my favorite because it was very like whimsical. So basically is a guy who, when he was a student, I guess wrote a fake review for an album of this real musician that he never released. Like he pretended that this musician wrote an album and he did a review on this fake album, but it never actually happened. And then he forgot about this like silly article he wrote. And then this man, like in his adult life, like 10, 20 years later, he goes to a record store and he sees the album there, which he made up like 20 years ago. So it's like, what? How is this possible? So that was kind of like the premise of that short story. The next one was With the Beatles, and basically it's two students who are dating, I think during high school, and then one day the boy goes to the girl's family's house to meet her and pick her up, but when he gets there, no one's there except the brother of the girl he's dating, and instead of leaving, he stays and spends some time with the brother, and they have an interesting, I guess, interaction, but then ultimately the girl never comes, I think, but then we fast forward like in the future, and then the brother of the girl and the protagonist run into each other in the street, and they catch up on what's happened in their lives. The next short story is Confessions of a Shinigawa Monkey, and it is a man who goes to this hot springs town, and while he's enjoying the hot spring, a monkey comes up to him and is actually able to speak with him in human, and the monkey says that he was raised by humans and that's why he was able to talk, and then because he was raised by humans, he actually loves human women, not monkey females, but because of that he's a monkey, he can't obviously be with a human woman. So then instead of pursuing human women romantically, he steals part of their name. So I'm just gonna leave it at there. The third last story is called Carnival, and basically it is a man and a woman who bond over this real life piano piece from the 1800s written by a composer called Schumann, and basically they are obsessed and they bond over this piece of, I guess, like historical music, and then one day he finds something out about her. However, there is no romantic spark, it's just that they literally platonically bond and share this obsession over this like historical music piece. The second last story, and this story is why I don't know if this book is fiction or non-fiction, or it could be both, is called the Yaku Swallows Poetry Collection, and this one is actually written, not actually written, they're all written by Murakami, but Murakami is actually the protagonist in the story, and I think it's actually his real experience. So basically he talks about his like obsession with this baseball team in Japan, and he talks about how this team changed over time, and he talks about how while attending these games, because baseball is kind of like a slower paced moving game, and because the team that he likes, the Yaku Sparrows, are like a team that loses a lot, that he actually started spending time writing poetry at these games. So basically the short story is a collection of poems he's written about baseball players while attending baseball games. And the last short story, which is titled after this book itself, is called First Person Singular, and a man is at a bar, and again, I'm not sure if it's Murakami himself or not, but basically there is a fellow woman down the bar, and she approaches him, and she says that he should be ashamed of what he did 3 years ago at the shore, but Murakami has no recollection of this woman or what could have happened on the shore 3 years ago, so that's just the short story basically. You can probably tell by my quick summary of the 8 short stories that there isn't really a clear common theme, except that maybe, for me, I felt like maybe you can't really trust things that happen to you, or like, not trust, but maybe in the sense that like, sometimes things happen to you in the moment and you think nothing of it, but then only later on in the future when you reflect back on it, you're like, that was actually kind of weird, or that was actually kind of strange. But in the moment, you don't really think anything of it because it's happening to you. So I thought that was maybe a common theme. Also, I thought this book was kind of meta because in the Shinigawa monkey one, there actually was, and I will quote here, a theme. Can't say there is one. It's just about an old monkey who speaks human language in a tiny town in Gunma Prefecture who scrubs guests, backs in the hot spring, enjoys cold beer, falls in love with human women, and steals their names. Where's the theme in that? So I thought it was pretty meta that Murakami kind of acknowledged the lack of themes in all these short stories, and it's really just sharing a story, and there doesn't have to be a lesson learned, and there doesn't have to be a point. So I think that is the common theme in this collection of short stories. As I gave this book a 2 out of 5, reasons why I didn't like it, and this is a really strong enough reason for me, is after the end of each short story, I was like, what was the point of that? Like, yes, I read a story, and yes, I guess it was pleasant to read, but I felt like I was like teased, like I was built up to something and nothing came of it. So I feel like this was a collection of short stories that you can honestly skip, and that's why I gave it a 2. But of course, as you know me, you have to be positive sometimes. So of course, there are things I liked about this book, and I kind of mentioned earlier is the writing flows so well. Murakami is an expert, even though his works are translated to or I guess I would put the credit to his translator, is really good at putting words exactly where they should be, and I can't imagine being put anywhere else, and it's just really easy to read. Like, I devoured this book in 2 sittings, but if I had more time, I probably could have done it in 1 sitting. So on Goodreads, this book got an average of 3.56 out of 5, which I think is very accurate. I personally think it could be a bit lower, but I think there's just some die-hard Murakami fans that no matter what he spews out, they would give a 5. So reasons why people didn't like it is people that were fans thought he could write so much better. I agree. I've read his previous works, and I feel like he could have written a lot better, but I do want to counter that because these are short stories, maybe there just wasn't enough time to get lost in each world. Maybe with his other novels, because it's the same writing style, but because it's longer, I'm able to invest more into the book. A lot of people felt the stories were forgettable. I can agree, aside from like maybe the monkey one and maybe the Bossa Nova one, the others were quite forgettable for me as well. Other interesting commentary that people put, but I didn't really pick up on, but I had read this controversy of Murakami being like a mild misogynist, is that some bad reviews on Goodreads was saying that they felt all the female characters were the same across every story and it was really flat. I can see that, but I don't think it's because he's a misogynist. I think it's because all his stories were written in the first person, and they were male. So obviously, men, obviously generalizing here, may have a certain view of women, and obviously they're telling the story from their point of view. So maybe that's why they all seem flat, because he's the main character, so he's the dynamic one, and everyone else in his life is flat. Reasons why people enjoy his book, as I mentioned earlier, is diehard fans love anything that he will spew out into the world. They enjoy the dreamlike of it, and they enjoy how it's very like whimsical, very surrealistic, which I get. They also like how Murakami is very great at bringing upon commentary on the strangeness of life and what it means to exist, which I can stand behind. why I think you should read this book. If you're a Murakami fan, of course you should read it. Why not, right? If you love this type of writing style and flow, definitely read it. If you love short stories, this is for you too. It's a collection of 8 short stories. And also, I think you should read it if you love books. They're very open to interpretation. I would actually almost argue that this book would be good for like a class or a lecture or maybe like a book club, because each story is short and can be really discussed to any which way. There is no solid or concrete answer. Now I'll share how this book, First Person Singular by Haruki Murakami, made me feel, because I always love to ask people if they recommend a book to me, how it made them feel, because if you ask me tomorrow, a week, a year, 5 years from now, I probably won't remember exactly what this book was about. Actually, in fact, I can guarantee you I won't remember any of the short stories except for the talking monkey one. So I love to ask people how a book made them feel. So this book, it made me feel very stumped. Like, unlike his other books, I just didn't really see the point of it or the objective of this book, aside from he just started writing and let the pen take him where it took him. So yeah, it made me feel very stumped. Thank you for watching until the end of my full book review for First Person Singular by Haruki Murakami. If you've read this book, I would love to hear what you thought down below. And if you want to join me next time, I just started This Reading's Life very late group read. I'm like a month behind because I just got the library. It's called My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. If you've read this book, please check out my book review, which I'll probably upload in a few days. Alright, bye!